The automotive industry saw significant transformation in the 1980s due to the introduction of new technologies, daring experiments, and evolving consumer preferences. In this context, American automakers produced a variety of cars that, although groundbreaking at the time, have since become obscure. These underappreciated vehicles, which range from oddball hatchbacks to early luxury coupe attempts, depict a time when American automakers were attempting to establish themselves in a market that was changing quickly. In this video, we'll take a nostalgic journey to revisit some of the overlooked automotive gems of the 1980s, each boasting unique qualities and leaving a distinct mark on car history. Hi guys, welcome to Finest Vehicles. Today, we will look at the forgotten American cars from the 1980s. You may not be familiar with AMC unless you were a car enthusiast or were alive in the 1980s. In actuality, AMC existed for 40 years, taking part in and, some would argue, initiating the horsepower wars of the 1950s and 1960s. Though it was also one of AMC's most recognizable models, the iconic Eagle SX4 was essentially the company's final offering. There are those who argue that the Eagle SX4 represented the original crossover SUV. It was powered by a 4.2-liter inline six-cylinder, naturally aspirated engine that put out 110 horsepower and 150 pound-feet of torque. The Eagle SX4 had an all-wheel drive setup and a 5-speed automatic transmission, which was reminiscent of modern crossover cars like the Hyundai Ioniq 6 and Toyota Crown. There are still Cadillac Allantés on the road today, despite the fact that they are officially obsolete. The market was moving away from floatboat land yachts and toward compact luxury sedans in the 1980s, and Cadillac was keen to modernize and compete with some of its European rivals. In order to have an Italian automaker design the Allanté, General Motors even traveled to Italy. The car was only manufactured from 1987 to 1993. A redesign was planned, but it was shelved because of low sales. The Allanté was a lost opportunity because, while it had a sleek and contemporary interior, its exterior offered hints about Cadillac's future direction. It had a 4.6-liter naturally aspirated V8 engine with rear-wheel drive that produced 290 pound-feet of torque and 295 horsepower. It was mated to a 4-speed automatic transmission. From the brand's inception until the mid to late 1980s, Buick produced a respectable number of sports coupes, but the Reatta was overshadowed by the Riviera and the Regal Grand National. The touchscreen system on the Reatta was its most well-known feature, but it wasn't very reliable, which discouraged people from purchasing it. In the early 1990s, Buick redesigned the Reatta, but it was too late because by then, customers had lost interest and Buick discontinued it. At that point, the HVAC controls and other features were physically pressed. The 3.8-liter naturally aspirated V6 engine in the Reatta had front-wheel drive, a 4-speed automatic transmission, and 171 horsepower and 220 pound-feet of torque. Despite going out of business and not surviving into the new millennium, AMC left a lasting impression on the history of cars. Their fleet included everything from muscle cars fit for a racetrack to surprisingly good four-wheel drive, pseudo-hatchbacks and crossovers like the Eagle Kammback. The Kammback was a compact hatchback with all-wheel drive that could tackle different types of terrain and large tires. It had a 4.2-liter inline six-cylinder, naturally aspirated engine that was mated to a 4-speed manual transmission and produced 110 horsepower and 200 pound-feet of torque. Despite some successes like the Brougham, the first-generation Escalade, and the Eldorado, Cadillac went through an identity crisis from the 1980s until the late 1990s. Like the current Cadillac ATS and XT4 models, the Cimarron was intended to be an entry-level luxury sedan for younger consumers. This was a smart move in retrospect. The Cimarron, on the other hand, had an exterior more alike to a Buick and a nicely appointed interior, making it appear nothing like a Cadillac. This most likely had a role in the Cimarron's demise. It had a front-wheel drive system, a 4-speed manual transmission, and a 1.8-liter naturally aspirated inline 4-cylinder engine that produced 110 pound-feet of torque and 88 horsepower. One of the longest production runs, from 1981 to 1991, was the Pontiac 6000. The Pontiac 6000 STE, or Special Touring Edition, made its debut in 1983. This model included power windows, captain's chairs up front, a rear air suspension system, and a V6 engine with increased output. The interior of the futuristic-looking sedan, which came in 2-door and 4-door versions, featured buttons on the steering wheel and a digital speedometer. A 2.8-liter naturally aspirated V6 engine with 130 horsepower and 145 pound-feet of torque, front-wheel drive, and a 3-speed automatic transmission propelled the 6000 STE. The 1982 Mercury LN7 stood out in the compact car market for its combination of style and functionality. This sporty hatchback boasted a unique wedge-shaped design, setting it apart with its sharp lines and aerodynamic contours. Geared towards those looking for a more engaging driving experience, the LN7 offered a distinct aesthetic that distinguished it from its peers. The lightweight hatchback weighed only 2,300 pounds. Its 1.6-liter naturally aspirated 4-cylinder engine only produced 70 horsepower and 89 pound-feet of torque, making it an incredibly slow engine. There was a turbocharged version as well, but the horsepower was reduced to 88. The front grille of the LN7 was different from that of the Ford because it featured 2 rows of slots instead of just 1. Other than that, their styles were extremely similar. The 1982 Ford EXP was a distinctive entry into the compact car market, blending sporty flair with practical design. Designed to attract a younger audience, the EXP featured a sleek, aerodynamic body and a distinctive wedge shape that set it apart from its contemporaries. With 120 horsepower and 120 pound-feet of torque, it produced a little bit more power. In terms of sales and production, the Ford version outlasted the LN7 as well, continuing into 1988. A number of sports models as well as a luxury model were unveiled, but the luxury model only included tasteful seat upholstery. The Chevrolet Citation, infamous for its unreliability and numerous recalls, particularly involving the transmission, was the automaker's response to the fuel crisis. Chevrolet attempted to rename the Citation as the X11 model in the middle of the 1980s, marketing it as a sporty hatchback. A 2.8-liter naturally aspirated V6 engine that produced 135 horsepower and 145 pound-feet of torque propelled this version. It could only reach 60 miles per hour in 9.2 seconds when paired with a front-wheel drive system and a 4-speed manual transmission. With the name Reliant, Plymouth struck gold, as evidenced by the fact that you can still see them on the road today. At the end of production, the Plymouth version sold a few 100,000 more units than the Dodge Aries version. With a 2.2-liter naturally aspirated 4-cylinder engine that produced 96 horsepower and 119 pound-feet of torque, front-wheel drive, and a 4-speed manual transmission, it wasn't particularly powerful. There was a coupe version of the Plymouth Reliant and a wagon version of the Dodge model. Which one would you like to own? Give your opinion in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, then please like and subscribe for more of the best new vehicle videos here at Finest Vehicles.